Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are covering what may be the most dangerous escalation in the Middle East since the Iraq invasion. Iran has fired ballistic missiles at Diego Garcia, the joint US-UK military base sitting in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Two medium-range missiles launched Friday morning, according to the Wall Street Journal and CNN, citing senior US officials. Both missiles failed to hit the facility. But let's be absolutely clear about what just happened. Iran struck at the heart of Western power projection in the Indian Ocean. That is not a minor provocation. That is a statement.
And Alex, what's critical here is understanding why Diego Garcia. This isn't some random target. Diego Garcia is the launchpad for American bombing campaigns across the Middle East and Central Asia. B-2 stealth bombers flew from Diego Garcia to strike Afghanistan in 2001, Iraq in 2003, and now almost certainly Iran. When Iran hits Diego Garcia, they're hitting the logistics backbone of the war being waged against them. The South China Morning Post reports two medium-range ballistic missiles were launched. The fact that they reached the Indian Ocean at all tells you Iran's missile program has range capabilities Western media has been downplaying for years.
Now here's where it gets deeply uncomfortable. Middle East Eye is reporting that the United Kingdom has now formally allowed the United States to use British bases for the Iran war, and this permission came directly after the Diego Garcia attack. Let that sink in. The UK didn't authorize base usage when the US assassinated Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei on February 28. They didn't authorize it during weeks of sustained bombing. They authorized it after their own territory was targeted. This isn't about principle. This is about revenge. Britain just entered this war not to protect anyone, but because its own imperial outpost got shot at.
And let's talk about that imperial outpost, because the mainstream media will not. Diego Garcia exists as a military base because in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the British government forcibly removed the entire indigenous Chagashan population from their homeland. Every single person. They were shipped to Mauritius and the Seychelles, dumped into poverty, so that the US could build a bomber base. The International Court of Justice ruled in 2019 that British sovereignty over the Chagos Islands is illegal. So when we say the UK is allowing the US to use its bases, we need to ask, whose bases? Built on whose land? This is colonialism enabling modern warfare.
That's a point that will never make it into a Downing Street press briefing. Now let's connect the Diego Garcia strike to the broader military picture. Iran launched these missiles because they are under an unprecedented assault. We are now weeks past the February 28 decapitation strike that killed Supreme Leader Khamenei, and the bombing campaign has not stopped. It has intensified. And tonight we need to cover a story that should be leading every broadcast in the Western world but isn't. Middle East Eye reports that an airstrike on the city of Ahvaz in southwestern Iran has killed a child.
A child, Alex. Ahvaz is in Iran's Khuzestan province, a predominantly Arab region in the southwest of the country. This is a civilian population center. It's an oil-producing region, yes, but it is filled with families, with neighborhoods, with schools. And a US or Israeli bomb killed a child there. Middle East Eye's reporting attributes the strike to either the United States or Israel, and the ambiguity itself is telling. We have two nations bombing a sovereign country and we can't even determine which one killed this particular child. That is the level of impunity operating right now.
And I want to press on something Maya just said. The phrase, US or Israeli attack, appears in the Middle East Eye report. Think about what that means operationally. It means the bombing campaign is so intertwined, so coordinated between Washington and Tel Aviv, that even journalists on the ground cannot distinguish who is dropping which bombs. This is a joint war being sold to the American public as Israeli self-defense and to the British public as force protection after Diego Garcia. But it is a full-scale aerial bombardment of a nation of 88 million people, and children are dying.
Let's talk about who benefits from the Ahvaz strike and strikes like it. Khuzestan province produces the vast majority of Iran's oil. If you wanted to cripple Iran economically while claiming you're hitting military targets, Khuzestan is where you'd focus. Every strike in that region degrades Iran's ability to export oil, which drives up global oil prices, which benefits Gulf state producers, American shale companies, and every defense contractor with a stake in prolonged conflict. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman stocks have surged since February. A dead child in Ahvaz is a line item in someone's quarterly earnings report.
Now I want to pull back and look at the strategic architecture of what's happening, because the South China Morning Post has published a remarkable piece about Taiwan studying the Iran decapitation strike. Military analysts in Taipei are closely examining whether Iran's political and military apparatus can survive after the killing of Khamenei. And the real question they're asking is whether Taiwan could withstand a similar surgical opening strike from mainland China. This is the part of the story no one in Washington wants you to think about. The Iran war is not just a Middle East event. It is a live demonstration for every military power on Earth.
Exactly. The SCMP report says experts in Taiwan are weighing the island's ability to withstand a decapitation attack modeled on what the US and Israel did to Iran. But here's what they should really be studying: the fact that Iran is still fighting. The supreme leader is dead. The command structure was targeted. And yet Iran just fired ballistic missiles across the Indian Ocean at Diego Garcia. The Iranian military is demonstrating what strategists call resilience after decapitation, and that has enormous implications. It means the US model of kill the leader and the country collapses is failing in real time, just as it failed in Iraq, just as it failed in Libya.
And that failure has consequences far beyond Iran. If Beijing is watching, and the SCMP piece confirms they absolutely are, the lesson is twofold. First, decapitation strikes do not guarantee victory. Second, and more dangerously, they may convince China that Taiwan's much smaller military apparatus would be easier to decapitate than Iran's was. We are watching the United States conduct a live military tutorial that its primary strategic rival is taking notes on. The Pentagon is so focused on destroying Iran that it's handing China a playbook for invading Taiwan.
The Taiwan angle also exposes a massive contradiction in US foreign policy. Washington claims to be the guarantor of Taiwanese security. The entire US posture in the Pacific is built on the promise that America will defend Taiwan from Chinese aggression. But right now, every carrier strike group, every bomber wing, every intelligence asset is pivoting toward the Middle East. You cannot fight a war against Iran and simultaneously maintain credible deterrence against China in the Taiwan Strait. The resources are finite. The attention is divided. Taiwan's security is being actively degraded by the very war the US is waging.
Let's shift to Ukraine, because the war there has not stopped just because cable news discovered Iran. The South China Morning Post reports that most of Ukraine's Chernihiv region has no power after a Russian drone attack. The regional capital, also called Chernihiv, is fully blacked out. This is a region that borders both Russia and Belarus with a pre-war population of nearly 1 million people. Governor Vyacheslav Chos confirmed that repair crews are working to restore electricity, but let's be honest about what's happening. Russia is systematically destroying Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and the world has stopped paying attention.
And the timing is not coincidental. Russia has conducted what the SCMP calls a vast bombardment campaign against Ukrainian energy facilities, and it has accelerated precisely as Western attention and resources have shifted to the Middle East. Every Tomahawk missile fired at Iran is a Tomahawk not available for Ukraine's defense. Every intelligence analyst tracking Iranian missile sites is an analyst not tracking Russian drone launches over Chernihiv. Moscow understands this perfectly. The Iran war is the best thing that has happened to Russia's Ukraine campaign since the full-scale invasion began.
I want to put numbers on this because the abstraction hides the human cost. Chernihiv in winter and early spring, with temperatures still dropping below freezing at night, is now without power. That means no heat. No refrigeration for food or medicine. No powered medical equipment in hospitals. No lights. Nearly 1 million people lived in this region before the war. However, many remain are now sitting in the dark and the cold because a Russian drone hit their power grid, and the country that promised to help them is busy bombing Iran.
And here's what the mainstream media won't connect. The UK just agreed to let the US use its bases for the Iran war. That same UK has been one of Ukraine's most vocal supporters. But military resources are not infinite. Every RAF base used to support Iran operations is a base not fully available for Ukraine logistics. Every British military asset deployed toward the Middle East is an asset pulled from the European theater. Here Starmer is making a choice, and the choice is Iran over Ukraine, and no one in the British press is forcing him to say that out loud.
Let's connect all 5 of these stories because they are not separate events. They are one event. The United States assassinated Iran's supreme leader on February 28. Iran's military, rather than collapsing, has continued to fight, including striking Diego Garcia. Britain, whose colonial base was targeted, has now formally entered the war. Children are being killed in Iranian cities. Ukraine is losing power in the dark. And Taiwan is wondering if it's next. This is a single cascade of consequences flowing from the decision to launch a decapitation strike, and every consequence is making the world less safe.
And who made that decision? Not the American people. There was no congressional authorization for war with Iran. There was no vote. There was no debate. The War Powers Act requires the President to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing forces to hostilities and limits unauthorized engagement to 60 days. We are now weeks into a sustained bombing campaign against a sovereign nation, and Congress has not voted to authorize it. This war is, by any legal definition, unconstitutional. And yet it expands daily. Bases are being opened. Children are being killed. Power grids are failing in Ukraine because attention has shifted.
The legal question matters because it's the only lever the public has. If this war is unauthorized, then every member of Congress who stays silent is complicit. Every senator who appears on Sunday shows to talk about standing with our allies without demanding a war authorization vote is abandoning their constitutional duty. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the power to declare war. That provision exists specifically to prevent exactly what is happening right now, an executive branch dragging a nation into a catastrophic conflict without democratic consent.
And let's talk about the media's role in this, because it is damning. How many American networks are leading with the dead child in Ahvaz? How many British outlets are explaining to their viewers that Diego Garcia was built on stolen land? How many are connecting the Ukraine blackouts to the Iran escalation? The coverage is compartmentalized by design. Iran is covered as a security story. Ukraine is covered as a separate conflict. Taiwan is covered as a future hypothetical. They are all the same story. They are all about the consequences of American military overreach, and the media's job, apparently, is to make sure you never see the full picture.
Let's go deeper on the UK angle because it reveals how the so-called special relationship actually works. Britain didn't volunteer its bases out of solidarity. It opened them after its own territory was hit. That's not alliance. That's escalation driven by wounded pride. And the British public needs to understand what this means for them. The moment UK bases are used to launch strikes against Iran, every British military installation worldwide becomes a legitimate military target under international law. RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire. The UK just painted a target on itself, and Parliament didn't even debate it.
The Diego Garcia situation also exposes the absurdity of the UK's diplomatic position on the Chagos Islands. The British government has been in negotiations to hand sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, a process the International Court of Justice said should have happened decades ago. But now that Iran has attacked Diego Garcia, those negotiations are effectively dead. You cannot hand over sovereignty of an island that is now an active combat zone. The war has given Britain the perfect excuse to maintain its illegal occupation indefinitely. Ask yourself, who benefits from that? The Chagashan people who were expelled from their homes certainly don't.
Now let's talk about Iran's strategic calculus because it's more rational than Western media will admit. Iran's leadership was decapitated. Their supreme leader was killed. The expected Western playbook says the country should fracture, the military should lose command and control, and resistance should crumble. Instead, Iran fired missiles at Diego Garcia. That is a message. The message is, you can kill our leaders, but our military infrastructure is distributed, hardened, and capable of striking your most distant assets. The SCMP report on Taiwan confirms that this message was received loud and clear across Asia.
And the failure of both missiles to hit Diego Garcia is actually more interesting than a successful strike would have been. Iran demonstrated capability and range without causing casualties that would demand immediate massive retaliation. It's a calibrated escalation. They showed they can reach the Indian Ocean. They showed the base is within their threat envelope. And they did it without killing anyone, which means the US has to decide whether to escalate further over a failed strike or acknowledge that its power projection platform is now vulnerable. Either choice is bad for Washington. Iran just changed the strategic geometry of the Indian Ocean with 2 missiles that didn't even land.
That's a critical insight. The military value of the Diego Garcia strike is not in the damage it caused. It's in the damage it promised. Every future operation launched from Diego Garcia now carries the risk of Iranian retaliation. Every B-2 bomber sitting on that runway is now a potential target. The base's value as a safe, rear area staging ground has been permanently degraded. And the cost to Iran was 2 missiles. The cost to the United States is billions of dollars in additional base defense, rerouted logistics, and strategic uncertainty. That is asymmetric warfare executed at the highest strategic level.
And this is exactly what military planners in Taiwan are studying, according to the SCMP. Not just whether they could survive a decapitation strike, but whether they could execute this kind of distributed, resilient response. Taiwan's military doctrine has been moving toward what they call an asymmetric or porcupine strategy, lots of small, mobile, hard-to-kill systems rather than a few large, vulnerable targets. Iran just demonstrated that this approach works. A decapitated state with distributed military assets can still strike at great range. That's not a theoretical concept anymore. It's an observed fact.
But here's the dark side of that lesson. If China concludes that Taiwan has studied Iran's resilience model and implemented it, Beijing might decide that a slow, grinding campaign rather than a quick decapitation is the better approach. That means a longer, more destructive war. It means more civilian casualties. It means a greater chance of US-China direct confrontation. The Iran war is not just consuming resources that could defend Taiwan. It is actively shaping the kind of war Taiwan might face. And none of this was debated. None of this was planned for. It is all cascading consequence.
Let's come back to Chernihiv because those people sitting in the dark deserve our attention. Russia's energy infrastructure campaign is a war crime under the Geneva Conventions. Deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure essential for survival, power, water, heat, is prohibited under international humanitarian law. And yet it continues night after night because the international community's capacity for outrage is finite. And right now that capacity is fully consumed by Iran. Vladimir Putin is watching the same news cycle we are, and he sees opportunity. Every night the world focuses on Tehran, another Ukrainian city goes dark.
And there's a devastating irony here. The stated justification for the Iran operation was to prevent a nuclear-armed state hostile to Western interests. But the actual consequence of the operation is that Russia, which already has nuclear weapons and is actively invading a European country, faces less pressure, less scrutiny, and fewer resources arrayed against it. If the goal was Western security, this war has achieved the opposite. NATO is stretched. European energy markets are disrupted again. And Ukraine, the actual front line of European security, is losing power grid capacity while the West fights in the Middle East.
I also want to address something that no mainstream outlet will touch. The Ahvaz strike and the killing of a child there is not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern of strikes hitting Khuzestan province, which is home to Iran's Arab minority population. This is a community that has faced discrimination from Tehran for decades, and now they are being bombed by Washington. They are caught between two powers that do not care about them. The Iranian government has repressed them. The American military is bombing them. And not a single Western human rights organization is centering their experience in this war. They are invisible victims of a conflict between empires.
Let me put a fine point on the accountability question. When a US or Israeli bomb kills a child in Ahvaz, who is responsible? The pilot who dropped the bomb? The commander who ordered the strike? The president who launched an unauthorized war? The members of Congress who refused to vote on authorization? The media outlets who sanitized the coverage? The defense contractors who built the weapon? The answer is all of them. Every single link in that chain bears moral responsibility for a dead child, and the system is designed so that no single link ever feels the full weight of that responsibility.
And the British government has now inserted itself into that chain of responsibility. By authorizing the use of UK bases for the Iran war, London has made itself complicit in every strike launched from those facilities. Every civilian casualty. Every destroyed home. Every dead child. British taxpayers are now funding the infrastructure of this war. British service members are now supporting these operations. And the British public was never asked. There was no parliamentary vote. There was no public debate. The decision was made behind closed doors after Diego Garcia was attacked, and the British people woke up at war with Iran.
Let's be clear about what the coming weeks will bring because this is not slowing down. Iran has demonstrated it can strike at Diego Garcia. The UK has opened its bases. The bombing of Iranian cities is killing civilians including children. Russia is exploiting the distraction to hammer Ukraine's infrastructure. China is taking notes for Taiwan. Every one of these dynamics feeds the others. Escalation creates escalation. Distraction enables aggression. And the human cost compounds daily. This is not a policy. It is a catastrophe unfolding in real time, and it is being managed by people who have not been held accountable for a single decision.
So what do we do? Because Truth Report is not just about naming the problems. It's about demanding action. First, call your representatives. Demand a congressional vote on the Iran war. The Constitution requires it. Second, demand that your media cover the civilian casualties in Iran, not as footnotes but as front-page stories. A dead child in Ahvaz deserves the same coverage as a missile over Diego Garcia. Third, do not let Ukraine disappear from your attention. The people of Chernihiv sitting in the dark tonight need the world to remember they exist.
Fourth, demand transparency on the UK base agreements. British citizens have every right to know the terms under which their military infrastructure is being used to wage war. Fifth, pay attention to the Taiwan analysis because it tells you where this is heading. The decisions being made today about Iran will shape the security landscape in the Pacific for decades. This is not a regional conflict. It is a global restructuring of military power, and it is happening without democratic input from any of the populations whose lives it will transform.
And finally, follow the money. Every war has beneficiaries, and they are not the people doing the fighting or the dying. Track the defense stocks. Track the oil futures. Track the reconstruction contracts that will eventually follow. The same corporations that profit from destroying Iranian infrastructure will profit from rebuilding it. The same energy companies benefiting from disrupted Iranian oil exports are benefiting from disrupted Russian gas supplies to Europe. War is a business model, and understanding who profits is the first step to understanding why it continues.
We started tonight with 5 stories. Missiles at Diego Garcia. UK bases opened for war. A child killed in Ahvaz. Chernihiv without power. Taiwan studying decapitation. By the time we end, you should understand that these are not 5 stories. They are one story. The story of what happens when military power operates without democratic accountability, without legal authorization, without moral restraint. The story of what happens when the people who start wars never face the consequences. This is Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. The truth doesn't need spin. It needs you to pay attention, to ask the questions your government hopes you won't, and to demand answers they're not prepared to give. Share this broadcast. Talk to your neighbors. Write to your representatives. The only thing that has ever checked unchecked power is an informed, engaged public that refuses to look away. Don't look away. Good night.